Good morning to all of you. Thank you for stopping by. In the next half an hour or so, we will discuss what is called the controlling the Z factor in bioanalysis. At the outset, I will be briefly describing what are the meanings of bioavailability, bioequivalence, and then what are the sources of variability in these BABE studies, followed by the topic controlling the Z factor in bioanalysis. Finally, I will show you results with a case study and explain, and then provide the conclusions. So bioavailability, simply one could define like it quantifies the absorption. Or one could go ahead and describe it a little more, stating that it is the extent and the rate at which its active moiety from the pharmaceutical form becomes available at systemic circulation. Or in a graphically, one could mention this as a concentration profile, the concentration change with respect to the time. In other words, it's nothing but the PK, pharmacokinetics, concentration versus time. The next term, bioequivalence, of course, the definition looks too long. Basically, when two formulations are administered at the same molar dose concentration under similar conditions and an appropriately designed study. So if it shows the absence of a significant difference in the bioavailability, then it is called bioequivalence. So in a simple way, we could simplify this big definition into, that means when two formulations are bioequivalent, that means they are same active pharmaceutical ingredient, same route of administration, same dosage form, same strength, same indications, and it compares to the RLD. In a simple way, bioequivalent means two forms are equivalent in the body, bioequivalent. Graphically, one can show that this is the test or generic and RLD in a pink. So when the concentration profiles overlap, then we call it as a bioequivalent. So what are the sources? When you say equivalent means there are some sources, some factors which are contributing variability to the study. What are those? First of all, it is the variability comes from the formulation itself. One could call it as an X factor. And then variability comes from clinics called Y factor. And then the variability comes from bioanalysis, the Z factor. So the sum of all these three variability factors, X plus Y plus Z, is the total variability in the study, which should be between 80 to 125 with respect to RLD. So in order for a project to be success, formulation to be bioequivalent, so if we could minimize any one of these or all of these variabilities, then the formulation becomes bioequivalent. Now, coming back to this X factor, most of the time the sponsors did do their best. They develop several formulations. They do the in vitro studies, and they pick a formulation which is very close to the brand. So therefore, this is done by usually the sponsors. Then let us move on to the clinical portion. In clinics, what are the source of variability? And all of us, we know whether the animals participating in the preclinics or the subjects brought in the clinical studies, every human being is a different body and different metabolism, so there's bound to be some differences. We all agree. We accept it as it is without any further discussion. But in addition to the inherent variability from the animals and subjects, we also get variability because of the study design. Just for a discussion's sake, let us say if one of the molecule got a Cmax at 5 hours, and someone designed a protocol taking the samples at 0 hour, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 24, 36, 48. In that protocol, the drug peak shape is defined by the concentration values of the 5th hour, 6th hour, and 7th hour. So if anything happens to concentration of the 5th hour or 6th or 7th, the peak shape is different, the AUC is different, it will affect the study. Rather, if someone does a good job, they can define the protocol in such a way, the sampling point says 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.33, 5.666, 6.33. They can have sufficient number of points to define the peak. So if anything happens to any one of those concentrations, you see a kink in the peak, but it will not really affect the study. So the study design is very, very, very crucial to minimize the variability in any study, whether bioavailability or bioequivalence. Then the clinical study execution is equally important. For example, in the same example, if the Cmax is, let us say, 6 hours, if while withdrawing the blood, if someone is withdrawing the blood 5 minutes before or 10 minutes later, the body is not going to wait until we really withdraw the blood. The metabolism keeps continuing. Later, we do some theoretical corrections, but theory is theory, reality is reality. Therefore, the execution plays a vital role in minimizing the variability. For example, if it is a liquid dosage, whether we are manually dosing or a meter dosing, or if it is a fed study, what type of food is being given, whether each and every subject consuming the whole food or not. So there are 100 different factors that bring variability into the study. So in order to minimize, one should have an excellent design and perfect execution of those studies. Then let's move on to today's topic, the Z factor in bioanalysis. So what are the sources? One is the instruments, and the second one, the analytical method, and the third one is the sample analysis. Let's go deep into each one of them. Instruments. One should really choose an appropriate instrument because there are certain instruments which are good for qualitative purpose and certain instruments are good for quantitative purpose. Now in these studies we are doing quantification, therefore one should use instrument which is good for quantification. And also the method of detection and the sensitivity level. So one has to really look deep and decide the appropriate instrument. Then followed by that, the condition is very, very crucial because analyzing chemical samples is different versus the biosamples. Because however neat the biosamples are, when you keep on injecting them again and again and again and again, for example, if it is a mass spectrometer, the source gets modified, which in turn affects the ionization, which in turn affects the quantification. Therefore, one should really pay attention to the condition of the instrument. And also, they need to maintain the instrument very well. And finally, the calibration has to be appropriate. If the instrument calibration if it is out of calibration, then the data has no meaning. So the instruments play a vital role in bringing quality into the study. And they have to be appropriate, they have to be well maintained, well calibrated. So then the next one is the analytical method. So especially in the bioanalysis, the methods are usually precipitation or liquid extraction or a salt phase extraction. One should not really develop method routinely. It is basically the method development is really an art. One has to really pay attention to the structure of the molecule, the functional groups of the molecule, the hydrophilicity or hydrophobicity, or whether the drug is that going to be converted back into metabolites or vice versa. One has to really pay attention and spend a lot of time in developing the method. That is very, very, very crucial. Now, the reason being is chemical analysis is challenging, no doubt. Pharma analysis is even little more challenging because there is a placebo effect. And bioanalysis is most challenging because you got matrix effect. Now, because of this inherent problem, FDA has given us plus or minus 15 to 20% accuracy acceptance criteria. What it means is, every CRO uses a validated method to analyze the samples, no doubt about it. But that validated method can have up to 30 to 40% variability inbuilt into the method. Therefore, we also contribute variable to the study. And one has to really pay attention in this method development. And of course, all of us, we do validate. And when we validate, the goal is that we have to meet the criteria provided by the health authority regulations. But that should not be our goal. We should not take that 30 to 40% variability, put it in our pocket as if it is granted. We should always try to minimize that variability to as much as possible, plus or minus 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, or if possible, you can eliminate it. That is very crucial. So when you develop such methods and validate, your goal should be to develop an accurate and robust method with the minimum possible variability. Now here I'm going to show such an example. I took fentanyl for a couple of reasons. As you know, it is a complex structure. And also, the other challenge is it is available in body at picogram levels. So that is the reason I chose this. In the next few slides, I'm going to show the results of method validation in the beginning. Here, what I'm showing you is we developed a method from 2.5 through 2000 picograms per ml. Each of this row is a validation experiment done on different days. As per the health authority regulations, this accuracy can be 80 to 120. But what you're seeing here is about 99s and hundreds. And the percent CV can be up to plus or minus 15%, is about half to 3. So if really someone wants to pay attention, then they can really develop a good method. It's not really difficult. First, we should do our job. So if you see 80 and 120, there's also a validated method, and in 99 and hundreds also validated method. Now, another way of looking for the robustness is at higher concentrations, showing accuracy is not a big deal, but at lowest possible quantification concentration, about 2.5 picograms. So these are 7 experiments were done. These are not like injecting from the same vial again and again. These are 7 different extractions done on a different day by different persons. And the accuracy is about 99 and 1. So this shows the quality of the method. This is an intra-assay precision and accuracy batch. As per health authority regulations at the LLOQC level, it can be up to plus or minus 20, and low QC, mid QC, HQC level, the accuracy can be 85 to 115. So we got about hundreds, and percent CV is 1 to 2 and 9. This is PA1. And another PA batch, the results are about 99s and 1 to 3. And another PA batch, the results are 95 to 100 and 1 to 5.5. These are 3 different PA batches. And if you look, the inter-assay precision among those 3 PA batches, they are about 98 to 100 and 1 to 4. So this gives an idea about the quality of the method. Now, another way, we also do during the validation a lot of stability studies. This is showing the benchtop stability at room temperature for about 18 hours is about 100 to 106 from 2 to 9. And in autosampler stability is about again hundreds and 2 to 2.6. In autosampler reinjection stability, about 99s and hundreds and 1.7 to 2.5. And this is post-preparative stability, again in hundreds and about 3. And in freeze-thaw stability, again these are in hundreds and 106, about 1 to 3. And in long-term stability, again in hundreds and 106, about 1 to 4.6. And this is not one of the FDA criteria, but we do during the validation, because in any lab when we validate, the batches are small, but during sample analysis the batches are large. So we run a very big batch during the validation, and the numbers about 100, this gives us that we are not going to see any surprises during the real study sample analysis. And again, this is a dilution integrity experiment with 5-fold dilution, about hundreds and 0.6. Here, what I'm pointing out is that if the method is really accurate and robust, and these are the type of results what you can see. Okay, so when the method is really good, then what is the next variability factor that brings in is the sample analysis. And for the sample analysis, it all depends upon the scientists. And what is their education and qualification, this is very, very crucial. In most of the labs, or in some of the labs, you do have a highly educated person like PhD or masters to develop and validate. But when it comes to the sample analysis, they do not mind hiring a high school graduate. They think that there's no science involved in sample analysis because there's a method written and you have to follow the method. But it's not really true. In the biostudy analysis, each and every number that we generate has a lot of value. Therefore, the scientists should have appropriate education and qualification, and they should be trained on the method, and most importantly, the scientist has passion for what he or she is doing. Otherwise, they will bring a lot of variability to the study. So when you have the accurate and robust methods and a well-trained, committed scientists, I'm going to show you now the results of the real study and how it will be useful. Now, one way to look at the results is, so these are the batches we ran in that particular study. These are the subjects in those individual batches. The samples were analyzed on these dates. And one could look at whether the batch is accepted or rejected. So when you see that when all these batches are being accepted in the very first attempt, that indicates the value of the method as well as the people. And then another way of looking the use of these accurate, robust methods and well-trained and committed scientists is looking into these calibration standards. I showed you this in the beginning during validation, but this is from all these batches. And again, if you see the accuracies, they are about 99s and 100s, and percent CV is about 1 to 4. So when you have the best methods and best people, this is type of results what you get in the studies. Another way of looking is looking at the quality control concentrations. In the studies, in each batch, if 2/3 of the QC's batch, we accept the batch. So here I'm showing you the first part of the table. So these are the batch IDs, dates injected, a number of subjects analyzed, and these are the concentration values. And if you see here, this blank is, in the beginning, we only use L, M, and H for the first 6 subjects. And see, the Cmaxes are crossing MQC or not. If not, we add an M1QC. And here I'm showing you the last part of the table. In that study, 68 QCs of the L and M and H were used, and all the QCs passed. So when 2/3 QCs pass, we can accept the batch, where in this case, almost all of them passed, and in M1 QC, out of 56, 55 passed. So in the whole study, 1 QC failed. So when you have the best methods and best people, and this is the type of results what you get. Then another way of looking how about the results is the IS variation. Because the method says, okay, you allocate 500 microliters of plasma, and then add 50 microliters of internal standard, then add 1 ml acetonitrile, do this, do that, do this, do that. So when I'm saying 50 microliters, is that each scientist really adding 50 microliters? Is he adding 40 or 45, 50 or 55, 60? So I want to see the variability in that. So these are the batches. These are subjects analyzed. This is the average IS area. In this particular batch, 120 samples were analyzed. 119 were within plus or minus 20, about 97%. In this batch, 127 were within that. In this batch, 120. So about 97 to 99% of the samples, the IS variation is within plus or minus 20. So this again tells me that the best method is the best and the people are the best. And another way of monitoring this is repeats. Now always, if it is a bioequivalence study, you submit this reanalysis table in the ANDA tables. And in this whole study, out of thousands of samples, 1 LIS and 1 HIS were repeated. Unless and until the scientist has passion for what they are doing, you do not get this number so low. If the scientist is only looking at how many samples I'm processing a day, how many batches I'm processing a day, what is my bonus, am I going to get promoted, then the data will be a little different. And still another way of looking at the quality of the methods is what is called incurred sample reanalysis. Now this is the latest concept introduced into bioanalysis like 3-4 years ago. And what the FDA or any other health authority regulatory bodies they are asking is, once we analyze the samples, they are asking us to take about 10% of the samples and reanalyze. And if our method is really accurate, the reanalyzed data should match with the initial data. And they are imposing 2 conditions. The conditions are, if 2/3 of the samples pass, then our method is an excellent method. And what is the pass and fail acceptance criteria is, the percent difference between the original and repeat value should be within plus or minus 20. And here I'm going to show a few slides. We always analyze the samples from each and every subject to show that our method is really valid for all the subject samples. We analyze samples from both the periods to show that our method is good for both investigational product as well as the RLD. We pick the samples near the Cmax, near the absorption, near the elimination. So throughout the curve, we want to show the data generated is valid. Now, this is the original value, repeat value, average, and percent difference. Anything you see plus or minus 20 is a failure. So you keep watching and tell me how many samples are failing. So in this slide, none. If you go to the next slide, there are also none. And in another slide, everything passed. The following batch, everything passed. In this slide, only one sample is passing with 17, but every other thing with a single digit. And if we continue further, again, all of them are passing here, and here all of them. So the convention here, usually if 67% of the ISS sample pass, the method is an excellent method. Usually in our lab, it is always 95, 98, 100. In this example, 100%. But most importantly, greater than 99% of the samples passed with a single digit difference, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So in order to get such a high quality data, one should have really excellent method and committed people. Then only you can get this type of data. So this tells you the data is more reliable and reproducible. In BA study, whatever you are generating the data in BA study, when a study passes, no one really cares about it. But when study fails, then there's a problem. They do not know the variability is coming from the formulation or the clinical phase or for the bioanalytical phase. It's very difficult to delineate. But in Sanova, what we can assure our sponsors is that if a study fails or if they see a variability, 200% it is not from bioanalysis. It is either from the formulation or from the clinics or from the combination of both of that. That much we could help our sponsors. So the summary, we should have the well-behaving formulation, so it will give the minimum X factor. And the clinical people should have an appropriate study design and an excellent execution so that they contribute to minimum variability to the study. And finally, as you have seen, if you have an excellent method and people, then you have minimum Z factor, which all will help. So once again, to summarize, in order to have minimize the Z factor in bioanalysis, one should really choose appropriate equipment, and that should be well maintained and well calibrated. And one should develop accurate and robust methods, and finally, well-trained qualified scientists, but most importantly with passion. That is very, very key in this bioanalysis. So this type of methods and people will generate reliable and reproducible data and will help steer the product development in the right direction. In especially NCE molecules, when you develop a formulation and send the sample for analysis and you got a data. And if you do not have that reliable data, then it will misdirect you in your development. And if it is a bioequivalent formulations, then this type of reliable data will establish that BRE criteria and help the sponsor to get that ANDA approved. And it will help them not trashing bioequivalent formulations. Finally, thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, we are at 8G65, and we can further discuss. Thank you. Yeah, usually if you see the deficiencies in biostudies, 80% of them are in bioanalysis and 20% of them in clinics. So if you have an excellent method and people, then you can minimize these deficiencies and help your studies pass. Thank you.